Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. We're so excited today because we have and receive a lot of questions about structures for teaching dual language.
And we're here with Magdalena Zavalia, who is a former lawyer and current CEO of the PAF Reading Program. And she's going to tell us all about dual language instruction. So welcome, Magdalena.
Welcome.
Welcome, Melissa or Lori. Really, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
We are too. And before we get too deep into this conversation, you all just heard our introduction, and we want to ask you, how did you go from practicing law to where you are now and being interested in education, dual language instruction, and all these things that you're into now?
Well, I think like most of these career changes, it was really driven by my children. Two of my sons have difficulty learning to read and it was clear to me early on when they were in kindergarten, the first one of the two. So he went to the Windward School. We were very lucky to live close by and be able to do that. And at Windward, I took many courses on reading and met Phyllis Burton, the author of PAF. And so that experience just made me really angry about all the children out there in the world, in the United States, but also in my native Argentina, and them not having the possibility of learning to read if they have difficulties or just because the system is not teaching it right. So I dropped the law and we put together a team and we wrote Aprendo Leyenda, which is a Spanish reading program to teach reading based on the methodology of PAF. And that's how it all started in 2016. And it's been amazing.
Can you tell everyone what PAF stands for in case they don't know?
So traditionally, PAF stands for Preventing Academic Failure. When the authors wrote it more than 30 years ago, that's what they were hoping for. They were hoping to address the needs of every student in their classroom. They always noticed there was a group that just needed more instruction, more explicit instruction, and then a percentage of the kids that just, had a very hard time learning to read. Today, we've rebranded it to the PAF Reading Program. In today's world, the word failure is not very welcomed. So we think about it in terms of promoting academic futures, promoting academic foundations, but the original name was Preventing Academic Failure.
I love that rebrand.
Yeah, my brain today.
We're thinking positive. We're going, but the fundamental is we just want those kids to have very, very solid foundational skills so that they can become learners.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sounds like exactly what we want for all kids.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm hoping you could start by kicking us off with telling us about the different types of models or terms for dual language. We hear a lot of terms, and I'm wondering how similar or how different they are, if they mean the same things, if they don't mean the same things, what are the nuances in all of these terms? So I'm hoping you can unpack that for us just to set a baseline for our understanding today.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And I have to say, some of them are used as if they were the same term, but they're not. And so, but before I do that, I just kind of want to set the background for our conversation because I think that's important. I think Claude Goldenberg explains very well some of these very difficult and important concepts. He says, to learn to read, a person must connect the oral sounds in a word with its phonemes, and then also attach meaning to it or bind meaning to it, right? And what the research says, and there's a lot of different bodies of research, but also the National Literacy Panel for Language Minority Children has confirmed, is that monolingual students and students that are learning English as a second language learn to read in the same way. They have the same brain, even though they're learning two languages or developing two languages at the same time. And this is important because in all of this conversation about programs, I think today we are in agreement that they have the same brain, they learn the same way, they need additional supports to develop English language. Oral English language, because they're learning to speak it and read it and write it at the same time. But when we're thinking about how to provide programs that serve our English learners in the United States, it's important to have kind of that fundamental concept kind of cleared and know that we're all in agreement. Anyway, and then the second part that I think it's really important is that there's a lot of research that says that the first language, the native language, can be leveraged, or it's very helpful while the students are acquiring the second language. So with that in mind, the conversation comes, well, what are the best models, or what are the models available to teach English learners to read in English and in their native language, if that's the case? And why is this important? And why is this such an important topic? And that's why probably you have all these questions from your speakers, because English learners represent 10% of the school population in the country, because there are more than 5 million English learners attending public schools in the United States. I think almost 80% of them are native Spanish speakers. And, I guess my children and I are part of that group. I think the second most common languages are Arabic, Vietnamese, and Chinese, which is very interesting to me. I just didn't have those numbers as clear, but it's fascinating. It just speaks to the diversity of our country. And then also because English learners lag behind their English-speaking peers. And that is just one of the puzzles that everybody's trying to solve as we think about these models. So that was a long introduction to your question, but here I come with the models. So there's monolingual programs, right? It's really English language immersion. And the goal here is for the students to become proficient in English, right? Speak, listen, read, and write. And so the native language of those students is not used really or leveraged in the instruction. It's just all English instruction. And I would say that the majority of all the schools in the United States have this monolingual program model. Then there are bilingual programs. And here's where the terms get confused and used one way or the other. Bilingual programs can be transitional bilingual programs, so it's called TBE, transitional bilingual education. Now, what they do is they leverage the native language to teach the second language. So either they maintain and continue to develop some of the native language reading skills or speaking skills, writing skills, as the students acquire the second language. But the goal really is still English language proficiency. It's a transition, right? You're using it for a period of time just to get the students to be proficient in English. The other bilingual model is the dual language program, or two-way immersion. And here the goal is very different. The goal is that ultimately those students become biliterate. They're learning to speak and write and read in both languages, and their academic career will be in both languages, their native language and English as a second language. So most of these programs recruit students that are 50% native speakers, for example, in Spanish, and 50% English, so that they're not all learning the same language as a second language, if that makes any sense. And so those are the two fundamental programs. And then how do you implement bilingual programs has many other, can be done in many different ways. There are 90-10 bilingual programs where students move through grades as they progress through their grades in K through the end of the elementary school. Really, they do most of their work initially in in Spanish, for example, if it's a Spanish-English program. And then they eventually transition to be fully either 50-50 or fully English instruction only. Most of the transitional programs, or many transitional programs, are 90-10, for example. And then 50-50, it means that they're learning both, like allocating instructional time equally between the two languages that the students are immersed or learning. So sometimes schools or districts allocate time on the same day, half to one language, half to the other. Sometimes they break down the language by subjects. They do reading in one language and math in the other, and some of the social studies in Spanish and some in English, for example. Most, I would say 50-50 programs are every other day. One day is in English, all subjects are in English, and one day is in Spanish. Some are every other week. And this poses a lot of challenges when you're learning to read. It's like you take a little vacation for 7 days between languages, and that just can be very challenging for the students and the teacher. So I would say that I've seen districts that have schools that use different models for the same program, and that just creates sometimes a lot of challenges and confusion in the system.
There's so many questions for you.
Yeah.
Can I start with, I just want to make sure I heard some things correctly. So you said the monolingual program is probably what we see in most schools. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. Where students are immersed in English language programs where all the instruction is in English with very little use of the native language to support that.
Do you know reasons why?
Well, I think
that's what we see the most.
Yeah, I think resources, Melissa, right? Because as you think about bilingual programs in whatever model you're thinking about, you just have to have, for starters, teachers that speak both languages. Teachers have to have very deep knowledge of not only how to teach reading and why, they also have to have tools to teach in both languages. They have to understand the connections between the languages they're teaching. Many districts and schools have maybe teachers that, Spanish teachers and then English teachers, but they're not bilingual necessarily. So they have to teach side by side. That poses a lot of scheduling issues, for schools. Schedules are a big challenge always for making instruction work. Another problem that happens is that then you have to have a system of support for the students that need tier 2 or tier 3 intervention that is also bilingual. So your special ed teachers have to either be bilingual themselves, or you have to have teams that speak in both languages. There are many, many reasons. And the other thing is that not every, although Spanish is the majority of the English learners are native Spanish speakers, in districts, you can have students from many different backgrounds. And so then you have to have as many teachers as those backgrounds require. And that's just really challenging.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When you mentioned the other common languages, you brought me back to my very first year teaching was in New Orleans. Right. And the only non-English speakers were Vietnamese speakers, which I was completely surprised by. I never thought going to New Orleans that I would have students who only spoke Vietnamese, and I don't think we had a single teacher that spoke Vietnamese at the school.
That was bilingual in Vietnamese and English and could do all this work. So it's just very challenging for districts and schools.
I was also curious.
Sorry,
yeah, go ahead, Lori.
I know, we'll edit this out. I'll pause. Melissa, go ahead. You go. Pause and then go ahead.
Okay. I was also just curious. You mentioned about the dual language programs that they usually have English speakers and the students are English speakers and Spanish speakers. So I'm just want to clarify and make sure I'm hearing that correctly, that there are students who are English speakers and they would also leave the program being both fluent in English and Spanish. Is that correct?
Right. So
that sounds really cool to me.
In dual
I wish I would have done that.
No, exactly. In dual language programs, when they're dual immersion, what the idea is, or the model is, 50% of your students in the program, if it's a Spanish-English program, for example, 50% of your students are native Spanish speakers, but the other 50 are English-Spanish speakers. Sometimes districts or schools have one-way immersion programs. In that case, everybody in the program is usually a native, for example, Spanish speaker learning to English as a second language. But that's not always the case. So what happens there is that, half of the class is a Spanish learner, if you want, because they're learning Spanish as a second language, and half of the class is an English learner. And so developing vocabulary for the two groups is, you have to individualize that to what they're learning to speak and read as a second language. And so it just poses many challenges for the teacher. Again, they have to have this very deep knowledge and be able to make these connections, cross-linguistic connections. And, when a student doesn't have vocabulary in Spanish because it's their second language, they might need support and clarification on things that for the native Spanish speaker are very, very simple and obvious. And so it's just one more complexity to the dynamic of the class, but also it's part of the richness of those classrooms, right? And then everybody finds places where they can thrive and places where they're really challenged and pushed. And I think for the students, that's very helpful.
Okay, so I want to go back to something that you said earlier because it's still rolling in my brain and it's confusing me a bit. So we have this bucket of monolingual models, right? We have this monolingual model. We have this dual language approach. And then we have this, is it fair to say a bilingual model? What you said earlier that's tripping me up is that you said two models, and maybe I misheard. Are the two models the monolingual and the bilingual, and then other underneath of that kind of bullet points in dual language, because that's where students all learn two languages? Can you just clarify?
Yes. So you have the monolingual bucket, and that's pretty, everybody's learning English when they start in kindergarten. And then the bilingual bucket. And that one has two subgroups, if you want. You have transitional programs where the native language is used or leveraged to teach English as a second language. And the goal in those transitional programs is English language proficiency. And then the second sub bucket or subgroup within bilingual programs is the dual language immersion programs, where the goal really is biliteracy, is for those students to achieve proficiency in English and Spanish. If the dual program is in, Spanish, English, it could also be Mandarin, English, Portuguese, English, but the goal is that they achieve proficiency in both.
Thank you. I knew I would regret not asking you that to clarify that in my brain. I appreciate that. That was so much clearer than my initial understanding. So thank you.
Right. So now we're curious about if you want to implement one of these, how do you go about doing that? So what we're curious, what is an ideal model to implement? We had written down dual language instruction, but I'm wondering if it's bilingual now that you just taught us the difference.
Right. So let me just start by saying that I am not sure what the ideal model is, and I don't think there's a model that fits everyone. But probably it's important that every school or district, when they're looking to implement bilingual programs, they think they have to go through a process of understanding first who their students are, right? What are they bringing to the table? What is their native language? How many native languages are represented in their student body? What is their cultural background? What are the skills they bring? Are they have they gone to preschool? Have they not? And there's a lot of questions there. But knowing your students is really the first step for a school or a district when they're thinking about a bilingual program.
That makes so much sense, Magdalena. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah. As much as the dual language immersion sounds like the ideal, if you don't have the right student makeup right. of the number of students you need to do that, or you have so many different languages being spoken, it's just not going to work out well, right?
Right. And really, in the end, the goal here is for the students to achieve their potential. And so I think that it has to start, the consideration has to start with them.
Right.
And then what's the goal, right, for those students? Now that you know your students, okay, are you looking for them to be proficient in English? And are you going to use or leverage the native language to achieve that goal? Or is the goal biliteracy, right? That they become proficient in both languages, if it's a Spanish, English, dual, bilingual program or dual language program. And so, that is also very important. Sometimes I've seen districts that the goal is not clear. And so then maybe they have a bilingual program. Maybe it's a dual language 50-50 program, but then they're assessing in English. But why are you only assessing in English if, you're really looking for biliteracy in both languages or proficiency in both languages? So having a very clear goal that suits or is really advancing the potential of your students is very important. And then the next question is, what's the best way to accomplish this goal? And here, there's so many considerations. What are your resources? What's your teacher body, right? How much are you going to put into giving them time for appropriate professional development? There's a lot that goes into teaching, not just English learners in a monolingual program, but in a dual language program. And the teachers have to have enough knowledge and time to implement it. To be successful and for the students to be successful. How are you going to bring your community in, right? How are you going to communicate with home and be very clear about having, so that parents know what's happening in school and also can support them at home with homework or, additional reading and extra work. I mean, you need the community to be all in for this to be successful. So I think that's a big consideration. And can you invest in this? And now you're going to give it time for the full implementation to go full cycle almost and assess if it worked or not for your district. So that's the second big bucket of things that you have to consider after you did establish your goals, knowing your students. And then finally, I think the other very important consideration is how are you going to assess the students and assess the success of your bilingual program. And to do that, and not just your bilingual program, how are you going to assess if you're teaching your English learners and they are achieving the goal of being proficient in English, and how long does that take? And this is a huge area of consideration, because assessments are important. They're important to screen students and understand who is at risk. And as they go through this journey, are you going to have the supports in place to support the students? And then how are you going to monitor progress and adjust your instruction as a school or a district, and be responsive to what the students need? So assessment it's a very important area, and it's usually the trickiest, I would say, for implementations.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think assessment is always really tricky, regardless. There's a lot of nuances there. So I'm wondering if we can dig into a practical example of what this would look like in, let's just say, in a school. If I'm a principal of a school and my goal is to have a dual language program, and say I have a curriculum for English language arts that I need to use, right, from the district, what does this look like? Like, for real, what are the constraints? What are the opportunities from your vantage point?
Well, I think the first, those principals have to first understand, if they have the teachers and the resources necessary on the teacher side to implement this. Do they have those bilingual teachers, or they have a Spanish? Let's, for the sake of this example, think about a Spanish-English dual language program. And do they have the English teachers, and do they have the special ed teachers in both languages, right? And so, and then do they have the assessments, and are the assessments mandated by the district also in both languages? Because you don't want to assess in only one language, since you'll be teaching in both.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay.
So sometimes districts mandate a certain assessment, and schools may have to bring another tool if that tool doesn't have Spanish language. So that's the first consideration. The second one is, even before we get to curriculum, is what PD is the principal going to provide for the teachers? And when you think about PD, there's almost like two levels of PD. One, I always think about PD in, teachers have to be given the time to learn about reading in general, and how reading, to develop a reading brain, and how to bring reading to the classroom. And then also they need training in tools, specific tools, which could be programs, to bridge that knowledge that they now have about reading and learning into everyday lessons. And there, in the how, there's a lot of constraints sometimes also given by districts. They're mandated core programs, they're mandated or not mandated, but shortlisted foundational skills programs. And now if it's a dual language program, then do those core and foundational skills pieces have a Spanish side? And if they do, does it cover, all the foundational skills I'm hoping to teach? And how do they talk to each other? Yeah, is the English and the Spanish, are there synergies between the programs? Am I not duplicating handwriting, for example? That's not necessary. It's the same alphabet. So really thinking about those programs, and are they high quality in both languages? And, because it wouldn't be fair if one is, really high quality and covering all the foundational aspects of reading, and the other one were just, a phonics program, for example, which I see a lot. So a little phonics in Spanish, and then really only read connected text in English. So, all of those considerations when choosing programs are important, but the restrictions that they have or constraints from district mandates are also a key factor in the decision. And then scheduling. I find that principals are my hero when they sit with those schedules in front of them and try to make it all work. That's a huge commitment. I think piling up curriculum and hours doesn't work. I think you have to really be thoughtful in giving time to the teachers for appropriate implementation, for appropriate repetition and assessment. So scheduling is really, really important. And then have a built-in system of support in case students are at risk or need more repetition or tier 2 small group intervention. So that also has to be a very important consideration when you look at that schedule. Are there special ed teachers going to push in, push out kids, and how is that all going to work? So I think it's there are many pieces to this puzzle, and then it's just a big challenge, but very doable. And there's a lot of good examples out there on how things work. I think another ingredient that is very important when you do something new in your school or district, and I think it's the hardest one, is patience. You know, the first year you implement anything, things are going to be messy, right? And they're a work in progress. Your teachers are learning a new methodology. Even if your school, sometimes schools are transitioning from a balanced literacy model to a research-based model or structured literacy model. And on top of that, implementing a new dual language model. So that's going to take time. And the first year things may not reflect in student outcomes, right? Maybe your scores are not better than the year before. Maybe they're flat. Maybe they're a little worse. Maybe they dip because your teachers are learning something completely new. So all of those things are just very difficult decisions for principals. And but it's very important that you wait the full cycle of your plan or your implementation, because otherwise then you drive teachers crazy, right? It doesn't work the first year.
That is true.
You toss it, and then you bring the next one, and then you toss it, because things need time. I'm sure you ladies are teachers, and your experience probably has been that.
Yes. If you go into any school closet that I think either of us worked in, you'd be able to see that exact trend of here's all the piles of stuff from over the years.
Yes.
So if I'm a teacher listening, we know the majority of our audience is teachers. Are there any resources or any practical things that you could recommend teachers use? Or are there any programs that are really good that you could set as an exemplar?
So I think a great resource for teachers, I'm sure they may be, and I have it here in front of me, so I'm going to read the title exactly as it is. There's a book by Elsa Cardenas-Hagan called Literacy Foundations for English Learners. I'm sure you both have read it, but her book is very well done in that it's easy, if you want, for teachers to read, understand. There's great takeaways from and so again, you have to build that background knowledge. So that's always where I think you have to start. There are many other places to go. There's a website called colorincolorado.org, which also has a lot of resources for dual language programs and dual language teachers looking to implement the program for the first time and ongoing. Of course, Aprendo Leyendo, our Spanish reading program, and PAF, they work beautifully, and I always welcome people to come and check us out. But I would say most programs out there now have a Spanish component if Spanish English is what you're looking for. We're working with schools in Rhode Island where they have 3 languages, so 3 programs in one school, monolingual, and then English Spanish, and then English Portuguese. And our friends in the Portuguese English program, it's hard. There's not a lot of programs out there to help them bridge that, the knowledge with the how in the classroom, right? And so they have to make their own lessons, and they have to find their own materials. And that is really difficult. I think fortunately for Spanish programs, there's a lot of out there. A lot of schools in New York City have Mandarin English programs, and there's more resources there than for Portuguese for sure, but I would say not as many as Spanish. So finding materials and programs can be challenging. And I think for those in the Spanish English camp, there's a lot out there that is offered. And I encourage teachers to really look at programs. And again, know your students, what do they really need? And then make good choices and decisions based on all the resources out there. You know, there's rubrics from the Reading League that are very good for evaluating programs and if they work for your students, and many other resources.
I'll throw in there too that we've actually had Elsa Cardenas-Hagen on our podcast. So
awesome.
Episode 119, if anyone wants to go back and listen, if they haven't already. And it's a great introduction to her book. So if you need a little step before you dive into that book.
That's great, Melissa. I think those intros make the book then much easier to digest, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And she's great.
We also did a book talk on this book too. So
yeah,
we loved it. And one of the things too, I thought that I would highlight it right here if we could take a moment. So if you've heard us say on other podcasts, we'll link it in the show notes. We're going to link all these resources that Magdalena just mentioned in our show notes. If you're wondering, where are the show notes? If you scroll on your phone under the episode, they're there. You can click on them. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. If you listen on the computer on Apple, the show notes come up, but they're not clickable. So just FYI, if you want to click on them, head to them on your phone. Unless Apple does an update sometime soon, then hopefully they'll be clickable. But for those of you,
you can also go to our website.
You can also go to our website,
literacypodcast.com.
literacypodcast.com.
And you can click on all of them.
Very clickable there. But I had someone ask, where are the show notes that you keep talking about? I'm like, oh, all over the place.
It's
hard, though. Say that out loud in a podcast. All right, Melissa, bring it on home.
Well, I actually have another question. Sorry.
Okay. Pause then. And
yeah. Pause it. So as you've been talking this whole time, Magdalena, I have a student in my mind that I taught in 6th grade. And so he came to me from another school, and his elementary school was a dual language immersion. Do I have all those words right?
Yes, you do.
And in Russian, and this was in Baltimore. So, I was a little surprised, to be honest.
Yes.
I was like, oh, like you can speak Russian? Like that was just, it kind of blew my mind. But the interesting thing, I remember him so clearly. His name was Jordan, and he was one of my best readers and writers, spellers in English, which I just find so fascinating because I feel like there might be a misconception, right? That if you're taking time through elementary school to learn 2 languages, like that's taking away your time to learn English, which, we see as the important language because that's what all we speak in America. But I just find that fascinating. So I was wondering if you could speak to that at all about the benefits of the dual language, both for native English speakers and English learners.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of research, and Claude Goldenberg's research is very good in this because it's very easy to digest, about the benefits of learning 2 languages or 3 or 4 as you're learning to read and become biliterate or bilingual completely. The question is, what is the trajectory, right? It's very different, because you're learning 2 languages and you're allocating instructional time to 2 different alphabets, 2 different set of grammatical rules, if you want. You're learning 2 codes. What is that time allocation? What does it look like? And also, what is the trajectory? Will you acquire maybe then English and the other language you're learning at a slower pace? But then there's like almost like an acceleration. There's a catch up that is wonderful, and it happens. And I think the research says that in the short term, the results or the data for the English proficiency is slower or weaker than the monolingual learners, and that makes sense. But in the longer term, it's stronger. Now, is this true for every student? Of course not. If there are students that are at risk of learning difficulties, acquiring 2 codes or learning 2 codes, breaking 2 codes and acquiring 2 languages could be even harder. So, and I think here is where I would love for there to be more research on what is the best implementation model. We talked about what are the things you have to consider when you consider a model for your own district or school. But when thinking about what's the best model, then I don't think there's enough research, right? And I think model and instructional practices have also an impact on achievement. What is the best time to the best way to structure your program? How much instructional time is needed initially, and how do you go through the different phases of language acquisition, and respond to that. So I agree with you, Melissa, that, the human brain is fascinating. I have a bilingual brain for sure. And how you think in the language, or you speak in the language you're thinking, and how ideas come out sometimes in both. You cannot, whatever I'm talking about, thinking about things that happened in my childhood, they definitely come out in Spanish. It's just fascinating to me. And there's no thing I can do to find the word in English, and vice versa, right? And when I think as a lawyer, I can only think in English because that's where I practiced for the most of my life. And it's just so fascinating. And I remember when I was in law school, there were students from Japan that I know couldn't say a word in English, but they got, straight A's in written exams and not even a spelling mistake, and how they had mastered the written code, but they couldn't really speak it. It was also fascinating to me. So I think there are many questions to be answered. I love that you remember that student. Those are the people that, make our careers. And I wish there were more research. And I think that there is a, renewed interest in this topic. And I'm always hoping that then more information will come to inform what we're doing in the classrooms.
Me too.
And another plug there, we've had Claude Goldenberg on number 152, episode number 152. So we've talked to all the people who you're recommending as experts here, Magdalena.
That's great. You ladies are on it.
Yeah, we try.
Well, is there anything else that you want to share about this topic?
No, I think that's it. But I will make sure that you all have all the resources and the links to the resources that I mentioned. And it was a pleasure to talk to you, ladies.
Oh, it's great to meet you too. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Yay.
Can I talk?
It says it's still recording, Melissa, on my end.
Stop.